doctor saves a dying black boy in a desperate race against time. Little did he know this act of kindness would have consequences he never expected. How does the black boy repay him? And why does it make the doctor break down in tears? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The fluorescent lights of St. Michael's Hospital cast their familiar glow as Dr. James Parker pushed through the revolving doors. The morning air still clung to his navy suit jacket, and the smell of coffee wafted from the nearby nurses' station. A burst of laughter caught his attention. To his right, a family huddled together, grandparents, parents, and 2 young children. Their faces beamed with joy as a doctor in white coat shared what must have been good news. The youngest child, a girl no more than 7, wrapped her arms around her father's legs while her older brother high-fived their grandfather. James felt a familiar ache in his chest that had nothing to do with medical conditions. When was the last time he'd shared such a moment with his own family? His daughter Emily's piano recital had been last week, or was it the week before? He'd missed it, of course. Another emergency surgery had kept him at the hospital. His phone buzzed. 3 new messages from Sarah, his wife. "Don't forget Tommy's baseball game this afternoon," the first one read. James sighed, already knowing he wouldn't make it. 2 back-to-back surgeries were scheduled, followed by afternoon consultations. The elevator carried him to the cardiac wing on the 4th floor. Nurses and residents nodded respectfully as he passed. "Morning, Dr. Parker," they called out. He managed warm but brief smiles in return. His office walls displayed his achievements: diplomas from prestigious universities, awards for surgical excellence, newspaper clippings praising his groundbreaking procedures. 20 years of dedication to saving lives stared back at him from behind glass frames. The day unfolded like so many before it. In the operating room, James was in his element. His hands moved with practiced precision as he performed a triple bypass on a 60-year-old grandfather. 4 hours later, he was removing a tumor from a teenager's heart. Between surgeries, he rushed through patient consultations, his mind already on the next task. "Excellent work today, Dr. Parker," his surgical nurse commented after the last operation. "That was your 5th successful surgery this week." "Thank you, Linda," he replied, but the words felt hollow. Another life saved, another family made whole, while his own slipped further away. By the time James finally headed to the parking lot, the sun had long since set. His phone showed 5 missed calls from Sarah and a text that made his heart sink. "Tommy kept looking for you in the bleachers. Maybe next time?" The parking lot was nearly empty, his silver Mercedes standing alone under a flickering light. James loosened his tie, feeling the weight of the day, and all the days before it, pressing down on his shoulders. The car's leather seats offered little comfort as he sat there, key in the ignition, wondering if his children would still be awake when he got home. The sound of muffled crying cut through the evening silence. James paused, his car door half open, and turned toward the source. Under the harsh glare of a parking lot light, a woman knelt on the cold sidewalk, her shoulders shaking with each sob. She wore simple clothes, worn jeans and a faded blue sweater that had seen better days, and clutched a small purse to her chest like it contained her last hope in the world. "Please," she called out to a passing couple who quickened their pace and hurried past, their faces turned away in discomfort. "My boy needs help. Please, just listen. I'm begging you." James felt his doctor's instincts kick in immediately, that familiar surge of professional concern washing over him. He closed his car door with a soft click and approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. As he drew closer, he could see the exhaustion etched on her face, the dark circles under her reddened eyes, and the way her hands trembled with fatigue. "Ma'am," he said gently, using the same calming tone he often used with distressed patients. "I'm Dr. Parker. Are you all right?" The woman looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks, leaving glistening trails in the harsh artificial light. She tried to compose herself, wiping her face with trembling hands that seemed unable to stay steady. "I'm Sandra," she managed between shaky breaths, her voice rough from crying. "I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't be here, but I didn't know what else to do. I've tried everything else." James knelt down beside her, his knees protesting against the rough concrete. The late evening air was chilly, and he could feel the cold seeping through his dress pants. "Why don't you tell me what's wrong? Maybe I can help." Sandra's eyes filled with fresh tears, spilling over despite her obvious effort to hold them back. "It's my son, Kevin. He's sick, so sick. His heart—" She fumbled in her purse and pulled out a crumpled medical document, the paper worn at the edges from constant handling. "We've been to 3 hospitals. They all say he needs surgery, but we don't have insurance. I can't watch my baby die because I don't have enough money. What kind of mother can't save her own child?" The desperation in her voice struck James deeply, resonating in a place he usually kept carefully guarded. He'd seen many patients struggle with medical costs over his years of practice, but something about Sandra's raw anguish made his chest tighten with empathy. "What exactly is Kevin's condition?" James asked, his professional demeanor softening with genuine concern as he leaned in closer. Sandra straightened the wrinkled paper with shaking hands, smoothing it against her knee. "They found a hole in his heart, a congenital defect, they called it. It's getting worse every day. Last week, he couldn't even climb the stairs to his room without getting out of breath. He used to love playing soccer. But now—" She looked up at James, her eyes pleading with the desperate hope of a mother at her wit's end. "He's only 12. He has his whole life ahead of him, but without this surgery, I can't bear to think about what might happen. Sandra, listen to me. Bring Kevin to the hospital tomorrow morning. Bring any medical records you have. I'll examine him myself. No charge." Sandra's eyes widened, but uncertainty clouded her expression. She clutched her worn purse tighter, looking up at the towering hospital building with its gleaming windows and modern architecture that seemed to touch the darkening sky. "This is such a fancy hospital," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The kind of place where important people come. I don't belong here." "Everyone belongs here," James said firmly, his voice carrying the conviction of countless similar conversations. "This hospital may look impressive, but its purpose is simple: to help people who need it. That's what matters most." Sandra shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her tired face. "But even if you see him for free, the tests, the medications, I can barely keep our apartment. I clean houses when I can, but with Kevin being sick—" Her voice cracked with the weight of her struggles. James placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, feeling her trembling beneath the thin fabric of her jacket. "Let me worry about the initial examination and tests, one step at a time, okay? First, let me see Kevin and understand exactly what we're dealing with. We'll figure out the rest together." The kindness in his voice seemed to break through Sandra's defenses like sunshine through storm clouds. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her worn sweater, sniffling softly. "Why would you do this for us? You don't even know us. Nobody's ever—" "Because it's the right thing to do," James replied simply, his warm smile reaching his eyes. "Come tomorrow at 9. Ask for Dr. Parker at the front desk. I'll make sure they're expecting you. Don't worry about anything else for now." Sandra's hands trembled as she carefully tucked the medical papers back into her purse, treating them like precious treasures. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." James watched as she stood up slowly, her shoulders still hunched but carrying a hint of hope now. The parking lot lights cast long shadows as he walked to his car, the weight of the day's surgery suddenly feeling lighter. As he slid behind the wheel, he caught a glimpse of Sandra in his rearview mirror, walking toward the bus stop with measured steps, her head bowed in what appeared to be prayer, her figure silhouetted against the evening sky. Starting his car, James felt a familiar warmth in his chest, the same feeling he got when he knew he could make a real difference in someone's life. It was moments like these that reminded him why he'd become a doctor in the first place. Sandra, too, then began to head home, not being able to believe what had just happened. She climbed the creaky stairs to their third-floor apartment, her legs heavy from the long bus ride. The key stuck in the old lock, as it always did, before finally turning with a reluctant groan. "Kevin?" she called softly, setting her purse down on the worn kitchen counter. Her fingers brushed against a stack of unpaid medical bills she'd been trying to ignore. A weak cough answered her. She found her son lying on his bed, wrapped in their thickest blanket despite the mild evening. His face was pale, making the dark circles under his eyes more pronounced. Another cough shook his small frame, and Sandra's heart ached at the sound. "Hey, sweetheart," Sandra whispered, sitting beside him. She pressed her lips to his forehead in a gentle kiss. His skin felt clammy beneath her touch. "I have wonderful news. A kind doctor at the big hospital downtown has agreed to see you tomorrow." Kevin's tired eyes suddenly sparkled with interest, a glimpse of his usual bright spirit shining through. "Really? A real doctor at the hospital?" "Yes, baby." Sandra smoothed his hair back from his forehead, treasuring the silky feel of it between her fingers. "Dr. Parker is going to help us figure out how to make you feel better." For the first time in months, a genuine smile spread across Kevin's face, lighting up his features. "Maybe he can fix my heart." Sandra tucked the blanket more securely around him, making sure his feet were covered, then turned to the framed photograph on the bedside table. Her husband's smiling face looked back at her, frozen in time from a happier day at the beach 3 years ago. His eyes crinkled at the corners just like Kevin's did when he laughed. She picked up the frame, running her finger along the edge. "I wish you were here, John," she whispered. "You'd know exactly what to do." The memory of their life before, weekend picnics, family game nights, John carrying Kevin on his shoulders through the park, made her throat tight. They'd been so happy, so normal before the accident changed everything in the blink of an eye. Setting the photo back down with tender care, Sandra settled into the chair beside Kevin's bed. Her muscles relaxed slightly as she sank into the familiar cushions. His breathing had grown steadier, though occasionally interrupted by a soft cough that seemed to echo in the quiet room. She took his small hand in hers, noting how delicate his fingers felt, like little bird bones beneath paper-thin skin. "Dear God," she prayed silently as Kevin's eyes fluttered closed. "Please let this doctor be the miracle we've been waiting for. Please help my boy." The morning sun had barely risen when Sandra and Kevin stood at the bus stop, waiting for their ride to the hospital. Kevin clutched his mother's hand, wrapped in his warmest sweater despite the mild weather. His other hand held tight to his worn backpack containing his favorite book. After a long, bumpy bus ride across town, they finally approached the gleaming glass doors of the hospital. The building towered above them, its windows reflecting the morning light like thousands of mirrors. Kevin's eyes widened at the sight, his mouth falling open slightly in wonder. "It's like a castle, Mom," he whispered, his voice filled with awe and a hint of nervousness. As they neared the entrance, a security guard stepped forward from his post, his face twisted in a disapproving frown. He looked them up and down, taking in Sandra's well-worn coat with its frayed edges and Kevin's scuffed sneakers that had clearly seen better days. "This is a private hospital," the guard said, his voice dripping with contempt as he adjusted his badge. "The free clinic is downtown. This place is for people who can actually pay their bills." Sandra felt her cheeks burn with shame, and her stomach twisted into knots. Her hand tightened around Kevin's as she felt him press closer to her side, confusion and hurt evident in his expression. She could feel him trembling slightly against her. "But Mom, didn't the doctor say—" Kevin started to say, his small voice quavering. "I think we should go," Sandra whispered, her voice trembling as she began to turn away, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. "Sandra?" a familiar voice called out. Dr. James Parker strode through the entrance, his white coat crisp in the morning light, a stethoscope hanging around his neck. His expression darkened as he took in the scene before him, his usual warm demeanor turning stern. "Rick," he addressed the guard sharply, "these are my personal guests, and I want to make something very clear. This hospital serves everyone, regardless of their economic status or background. If I ever hear you treating patients this way again, I'll be having a word with hospital administration." His words carried the weight of authority that came from years of experience. The guard's face paled as he stammered an apology, suddenly finding great interest in studying his shoes. "Come with me," James said kindly to Sandra and Kevin, placing a gentle hand on Kevin's shoulder. "Let's get you checked in." He guided them through the sliding doors, past the chastened guard, and into the cool hospital lobby where the smell of disinfectant hung in the air. At the reception desk, James helped Sandra navigate the stack of paperwork, explaining each form with patience and understanding. He then knelt down to Kevin's level, his smile warm and genuine as he adjusted his tie. "Don't worry about a thing, buddy," he said, meeting Kevin's nervous gaze with steady reassurance. "We're going to take good care of you here. I promise." The hospital room was bright and welcoming, with cheerful paintings of hot air balloons and fluffy clouds decorating the walls. Sunlight streamed through the large window, casting warm patches across the floor. James made sure Kevin got settled into the bed while a nurse efficiently hooked up monitoring equipment, the gentle beeping of machines filling the quiet space. "I'm going to need to run some tests, Kevin," James explained, keeping his voice gentle and maintaining eye contact with the boy. "Think of it like being a space explorer. We're going to map out what's happening in your heart, just like astronauts chart new territories. The tests will take a few hours. Why don't you get some rest? I'll have some food sent up for you. You'll need to keep your strength up, too." Sandra nodded gratefully, sinking into the cushioned chair beside Kevin's bed. Throughout the morning, various technicians came and went, performing echocardiograms, blood tests, and other diagnostics. The steady stream of medical staff worked with quiet efficiency, each focused on their specific task. James had arranged for a tray of sandwiches and fresh fruit to be delivered to Sandra, who barely touched the food as she watched her son undergo test after test, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. By late afternoon, James stood in his office studying the test results spread across his mahogany desk. His heart grew heavy as he analyzed each report, running his hand through his hair in frustration. The hole in Kevin's heart was larger than initially suspected, and there were complications with the surrounding tissue that made the case even more critical. With a deep breath, he walked back to Kevin's room, his footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. Sandra looked up as he entered, immediately reading the concern in his eyes and the tight set of his jaw. "Sandra, could we step outside for a moment?" James asked softly, gesturing toward the door. In the hallway, James gently explained the situation, choosing his words carefully. "Kevin's condition is more serious than we thought. Without surgery in the next few days, his heart could fail. He needs immediate intervention to prevent further deterioration." Sandra's legs gave out, and James quickly helped her to a nearby chair, his steady hand supporting her shoulders. "But the cost," she whispered, tears streaming down her face and falling onto her worn sweater. "I can't lose him, Dr. Parker. He's all I have left in this world." James watched this mother's world crumbling before him, thought of Kevin's brave smile during the tests and his space explorer enthusiasm, and made his decision without hesitation. "I'll perform the surgery myself at no cost," he said firmly, his voice filled with conviction. "We'll schedule it for first thing tomorrow morning. Kevin's life is what matters here, not money. We'll make this work." Sandra looked up at him in disbelief, her hands trembling as she wiped away tears. "You would do that? For us?" "Yes," James replied simply, his expression softening. "Let's get Kevin prepped for tomorrow. He'll need to stay overnight for observation, and we'll take excellent care of him." Then Kevin and Sandra went to the observation room, amidst the echo of hospital staff who took complete care of the little boy. Next day, James came very early. It was barely 8 a.m., but he wanted to check on Kevin before the surgery. His dedication to his patients always brought him in early, especially for cases like this. When he entered the room, he found Kevin sitting up in bed, clutching a worn teddy bear close to his chest, its fuzzy brown fur matted from years of love. "Good morning, Kevin," James said warmly, his smile genuine and reassuring. "I see you brought a friend with you." "This is Mr. Fuzzy," Kevin replied softly, hugging the bear tighter. "Mom says he'll watch over me during the operation. He's been with me since I was little." Sandra stood by the window, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept much. The weight of worry was visible in her posture as she managed a tired smile, while James checked Kevin's vitals, his movements practiced and gentle. "Dr. Parker," a stern voice called from the doorway. "A word, please." James recognized Dr. Milner, the hospital's senior cardiac surgeon, his silver hair and commanding presence impossible to miss. In the hallway, the older doctor's face was tight with disapproval, his arms crossed firmly over his chest. "What are you thinking, James? Pro bono surgery for someone who can't even afford basic care? We have paying patients waiting. The board won't be happy about this." James straightened his shoulders, squaring himself against the criticism. "With all due respect, sir, that boy in there needs our help. His condition is critical, and we both know it." "There are other hospitals that handle charity cases," Dr. Milner argued, his voice sharp. "Your time is too valuable." "Too valuable for what?" James interrupted, keeping his voice low but firm, his passion evident in every word. "Too valuable to save a child's life? This hospital's mission statement talks about serving all members of our community. Did you notice the all part? Or have we forgotten what that means?" Dr. Milner's expression wavered as James continued, his conviction unwavering. "That boy deserves the same chance at life as any other patient. Medicine isn't just about profit margins, it's about helping people who need it most. If we turn our backs on cases like this, we're failing as doctors and as human beings. I won't let that happen." A long moment passed as the two men stood in silence, the early morning hospital sounds filling the space between them. Finally, Dr. Milner's stern expression softened slightly, a glimpse of understanding crossing his weathered features. "You always were an idealist, James," he said, turning to leave. "Just make sure you don't burn yourself out. We need surgeons like you." James returned to Kevin's room where Sandra was helping her son sip some water from a plastic cup, her hand steady despite her exhaustion. "Everything okay?" she asked anxiously, her eyes searching his face for any sign of trouble. "Everything's perfect," James assured them, sitting on the edge of Kevin's bed and giving the boy's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Now, Kevin, are you and Mr. Fuzzy ready to be brave? We've got quite an adventure ahead of us." They then took Kevin to the operating room, which hummed with the steady beep of monitors as Kevin was wheeled in on the surgical table. The harsh fluorescent lights reflected off the polished instruments laid out with precision, each tool carefully arranged in the exact order they would be needed. Kevin's small frame looked even tinier against the expanse of white surgical drapes, his pale face a stark contrast against the sterile environment. "Remember what we talked about, buddy?" James asked, adjusting his surgical mask and giving Kevin a reassuring wink. "Just like going to sleep for a little while. When you wake up, you'll be on your way to feeling much better." Kevin nodded bravely, though his grip on Mr. Fuzzy remained tight until the anesthesiologist gently took the bear. Her kind eyes smiled above her mask. "We'll keep him safe right here," she promised, placing the stuffed animal carefully on a nearby shelf where Kevin could see it until he drifted off. As the anesthesia took effect, James took a deep breath and centered himself. The next 8 hours were a testament to focus and precision. Every movement had to be perfect, every decision crucial. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he meticulously worked to repair the hole in Kevin's tiny heart, his experienced hands moving with practiced care through each delicate step of the procedure. Outside in the waiting area, Sandra couldn't sit still. She paced back and forth, her shoes wearing an invisible path in the linoleum floor, occasionally stopping to stare out the window at the city below. Every time the operating room doors swung open, her heart jumped, but it was never news about Kevin. She alternated between silent prayers and quiet tears, clutching her husband's photo in her pocket like a lifeline, drawing strength from his memory. Hour after hour passed in agonizing slowness. Other families came and went, receiving news about their loved ones, but Sandra remained, her anxiety growing with each passing minute. The morning light faded into afternoon, then early evening, casting long shadows through the waiting room windows. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, James emerged from the operating room. His surgical cap was damp with sweat, and exhaustion lined his face, but his eyes crinkled with a smile as he approached Sandra. His scrubs showed signs of the long hours he'd spent working to save her son. "The surgery was successful," he announced, his voice warm with satisfaction. "We were able to repair the hole completely. Kevin did wonderfully. He's strong, just like his mother." Sandra's knees buckled with relief. She threw her arms around James, tears flowing freely now. "Thank you," she sobbed, her whole body trembling. Thank you so much. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." James returned the hug, feeling something shift inside him. This wasn't just another successful surgery. This was a reminder of why he became a doctor in the first place. The genuine gratitude in Sandra's embrace touched something that had been dormant in him for too long, rekindling the passion that had first drawn him to medicine. "He'll need to stay here for a few days," James explained gently as Sandra wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "We'll need to monitor his recovery closely, but he's going to be just fine. You'll be able to see him soon once he's settled in recovery." Kevin woke up the next morning. His vision was blurry at first, but as it cleared, he saw his mother's face hovering above him, her eyes glistening with tears. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed her sleepless night. "Mom," he whispered, his voice scratchy and weak from the breathing tube that had been removed earlier. "I'm here, sweetheart," Sandra said softly, quickly wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. She reached out and smoothed his hair back from his forehead, her touch gentle and comforting. The familiar scent of her lavender hand cream wrapped around him like a warm blanket. As the morning progressed and Kevin became more alert, his natural curiosity began to surface. The fog of anesthesia slowly lifted from his mind, replaced by questions. "Mom, how much did all this cost?" he asked, looking around at the equipment surrounding his bed, his eyes lingering on the heart monitor's steady green line. Sandra tried to redirect his attention, forcing a smile. "Don't worry about that now, honey. Just focus on getting better." But Kevin persisted throughout the morning, his questions becoming more specific. He'd always been observant, even when recovering from major surgery. "The nurses said I was in surgery for 8 hours. That must cost a lot, right?" His fingers fidgeted with the edge of his blanket as he spoke. Finally, Sandra stood up, smoothing her wrinkled clothes. "I'll go check at the front desk, okay? Just rest while I'm gone." At the reception desk, Sandra nervously approached the clerk, her hands twisting together. "I'd like to know about my son's medical bills, Kevin." The clerk typed on her computer, the clicking of keys filling the silence, then smiled warmly. "Oh yes, everything has been taken care of. The full amount, $20,000, has been covered." Sandra's eyes widened, her breath catching. $20,000? "Yes, ma'am, it's all handled. You don't need to worry about anything. Could I have a copy of the bill just for my records?" The clerk printed out the detailed statement and handed it to Sandra, who stared at the numbers in disbelief, her hands trembling slightly as she held the paper. Back in Kevin's room, she found him sitting up straighter, looking more alert than before. Some color had returned to his cheeks. "Did you find out, Mom?" Sandra showed him the bill, watching as his eyes grew wide at the amount. $20,000? He gasped. That's so much money." His face grew serious and he gripped the blanket tightly, a determined look settling in his young eyes. "Mom, I know what I want to do when I grow up. I want to be a doctor like Dr. James. I want to help people just like he helped me." His voice grew stronger with each word, filled with newfound purpose. Sandra then kissed Kevin, saying, "You don't need to worry about anything else, sweetheart. You don't need to pay Dr. James. You're safe here with me, and that's the only thing that matters. Just 2 days more, and then I will take you home." Those 2 days passed by in a flurry, full of constant checks and intensive care, something Sandra could never have been able to afford with her salary. The morning of Kevin's 3rd day in recovery brought a familiar face to his hospital room. Dr. James Parker walked in, clipboard in hand and a warm smile on his face. The sunlight streaming through the window made his white coat seem to glow, casting a gentle halo around his tall figure. The steady beeping of monitors provided a reassuring background rhythm to the peaceful morning scene. "Good morning, Kevin. How are you feeling today?" James asked, his eyes twinkling with genuine care as he approached the bed. Kevin sat up straighter in his bed, wincing slightly but maintaining his bright smile. His color had improved significantly since the surgery, and his eyes sparkled with renewed energy. "Much better, Dr. James. The nurses said I can go home today." "That's right," James confirmed, holding up the discharge papers. He turned to Sandra, who was organizing Kevin's few belongings into a small duffel bag. He's made remarkable progress, one of the fastest recoveries I've seen for this type of surgery. "Dr. James," Kevin said, his voice suddenly serious, his small hands clutching the edge of his blanket. "I don't know how to thank you enough. What you did for us, I'll never forget it." James pulled out his stethoscope and began his final check of Kevin's vital signs, the metal warming quickly against the boy's chest. "Deep breath for me," he instructed, listening carefully to Kevin's heart. The steady rhythm brought a satisfied smile to his face. Each beat was strong and clear, exactly as it should be. "Everything sounds perfect," he announced, then turned to Sandra, whose tired face couldn't hide her relief. "I've prepared detailed instructions for his follow-up care." He handed her several pages of carefully written notes, each one filled with precise instructions and emergency contact numbers. "Make sure he takes it easy for the next few weeks. No strenuous activity, no running around, and plenty of rest." Kevin fidgeted with his blanket, his fingers tracing the hospital's logo printed on the thin fabric. "One day, I'm going to pay you back for everything, Dr. James. I promise." James chuckled softly, patting Kevin's shoulder. The boy's earnest declaration touched something deep within him. "Just focus on doing well in life, Kevin. That's all the repayment I need." "But I mean it," Kevin insisted, his young face full of determination, his jaw set firmly. "What you did for us, it means everything." James felt a warmth spread through his chest, but he shook his head modestly. His years of experience had taught him that sometimes the greatest rewards came from the simplest moments like these. "Seeing you healthy and happy is more than enough for me." As Sandra gathered their things and helped Kevin into a wheelchair, the boy's eyes remained fixed on James, full of gratitude and admiration. They made their way through the hospital corridors, past the busy nurses' station and the familiar faces of the hospital staff, James walking alongside them until they reached the entrance. The morning sun painted everything in a hopeful light. Kevin turned in his wheelchair, taking one last look at the hospital building, his expression filled with purpose and something more, a dream taking shape in his young mind. Despite making a quick recovery, Kevin was still weak. As soon as Sandra got him home, she gave him some antibiotics so that he could drift off to sleep and rest up for another day. The next day, however, was going to be the start of something she had never imagined. "Good morning, sweetheart," Sandra called from the kitchen, the sound of pots clattering. "How are you feeling?" Kevin carefully pushed himself up and made his way to the kitchen, where his mother was stirring a pot of oatmeal. The familiar scent of breakfast made his stomach rumble. "Better, Mom. Much better." Together they prepared a simple breakfast, Kevin helping where he could despite his mother's protests. He insisted on doing small tasks, like getting the bowls from the cabinet. As they worked, the small kitchen filled with the warm scent of cinnamon and the sound of their shared dreams. "I'm going to study really hard," Kevin declared, carefully measuring milk into their bowls, his hand steady and determined. "I want to be just like Dr. James." Sandra smiled, her eyes glistening with pride and hope. "I know you will, baby. You can do anything you set your mind to." In the weeks that followed, Kevin threw himself into his studies with renewed determination. Each afternoon after school, while other kids played basketball and rode bikes outside, he sat at his desk, poring over textbooks. Science became his favorite subject, and he paid special attention during biology lessons, taking detailed notes and imagining himself in a white coat like Dr. James. Sandra found new work at the Lucky Star Diner, taking the evening shift so she could see Kevin off to school in the mornings. The work was hard, long hours on her feet, demanding customers and meager tips, but she never complained. Her shoes might hurt and her back ache, but she kept going. Each night when she returned home, her uniform smelling of grease and coffee, she found Kevin still awake, surrounded by books and determination. Not everything was easy. Some kids at school made fun of his dreams, telling him that black people couldn't become doctors. They whispered and pointed in the hallways. Even a teacher once suggested he should set more realistic goals. But Kevin remembered Dr. James's kindness and kept pushing forward, meeting each challenge with determination and quiet strength. One night, as Sandra trudged up the apartment stairs after a particularly long shift, her feet aching in her worn shoes, Kevin met her at the door. Seeing the exhaustion in her face and the slump of her shoulders, he hugged her tightly. "One day, Mom," he whispered, his voice full of conviction. "You won't have to work so hard anymore. I promise I'll take care of you." Sandra held him close, her tears falling silently into his hair. In that moment, despite their tiny apartment and all their struggles, despite the unpaid bills on the counter and the long road ahead, her heart was full of hope for the future they would build together. Months turned into years, and Kevin was soon 19 before he knew it. Time had passed quickly, changing a lot of things. But one thing that did not change was his determination. It was the day of college results, where students who received a scholarship would be called out. Kevin's hands trembled as he sat at the library computer, the screen's glow illuminating his anxious face. The college website loaded painfully slowly, each second feeling like an eternity. Around him, other students chatted and studied, their backpacks scattered across tables, completely unaware of how this moment could change his life forever. "Please, please," he whispered, entering his student ID number with trembling fingers. His heart thundered in his chest as he scrolled through the alphabetical list of names, each letter bringing him closer to his future. The memory of countless late nights studying, of his mother's sacrifices, of Dr. James's kindness. It all led to this moment. Then he saw his name. His eyes darted across the screen, reading and rereading the results until they burned. Full scholarship. Monthly grant. His vision blurred with tears as the reality sank in. He had done it. All those hours of work, all those prayers, had finally paid off. Gathering his belongings with shaking hands, Kevin practically ran from the library, nearly forgetting his jacket on the chair. The spring air felt electric against his skin as he sprinted toward home, toward his mother. "Mom!" He burst through the door, finding Sandra sorting through bills at their small kitchen table, her reading glasses perched on her nose. "Mom, I got in! Full scholarship!" Sandra's eyes went wide, her hand flying to her mouth. "What?" The bills scattered forgotten across the table. "I got the scholarship, Mom. And there's more, they're giving me a monthly grant. You won't have to work at the diner anymore. We'll have enough. No more double shifts, no more weekends." Sandra stood slowly, her legs unsteady, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. "My baby," she whispered, before pulling Kevin into a tight embrace. Their tears mingled as they held each other, years of struggle and hope pouring out in waves of joy. The afternoon sunlight streamed through their small window, warming them both. That evening, they sat together at their small table, sharing a simple dinner of Sandra's homemade enchiladas, Kevin's favorite since childhood. The food tasted better somehow, seasoned with their shared happiness and relief. The familiar scent of cumin and chili powder filled their tiny kitchen with memories of countless family meals. "I still can't believe it," Sandra said, wiping happy tears from her eyes. "All your hard work, even with everything you've been through." "I'm going to make you proud, Mom," Kevin promised, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "This is just the beginning. I'm going to be a doctor, just like Dr. James." Sandra smiled, her face glowing with pride, the worry lines around her eyes softening. "You already have, mi amor. You already have." Soon after the results were out, Kevin joined his dream university and was headed out for the very first day of his college. Kevin stood at the entrance of Wellington University, his worn backpack slung over one shoulder, the zipper missing its pull tab. Students streamed past him, their designer clothes and confident strides marking them as different from him. The sweet scent of freshly cut grass filled the air, mingling with the aroma of expensive coffee from nearby cafes. His hand instinctively went to his chest, touching the small scar hidden beneath his shirt, a constant reminder of Dr. James's life-saving operation. In his first week of classes, the differences between him and his classmates became painfully clear. During a study group in the library's oak-paneled reading room, a classmate casually mentioned their family's private yacht in the Mediterranean. while another complained about having to fly commercial instead of using their father's private jet. Kevin sat quietly, his second-hand textbooks spread before him, their spines cracked and pages dog-eared by previous owners, feeling like an outsider. "Where did you summer?" a girl named Ashley asked him during lunch break, her designer watch glinting in the cafeteria lights. "I worked," Kevin replied simply, remembering the long hours he'd spent helping his mother at the diner, the smell of grease and coffee clinging to his clothes each night. "Oh," she responded, her nose wrinkling slightly, perfectly manicured fingers toying with her pearl necklace. The conversation died after that, and Kevin found himself eating alone more often than not, finding solace in the quiet corner tables. The isolation grew as the semester progressed. While his classmates organized weekend trips to beach houses and exclusive clubs, Kevin buried himself in his studies. The library became his sanctuary, its quiet corners offering refuge from the constant reminders of his different social status. He found comfort in the musty smell of old books and the soft whisper of turning pages. Every weekend he took the bus home to visit Sandra, watching the city landscape gradually transform into familiar neighborhood streets. Their small apartment, with its familiar scents and worn furniture, became his refuge. They would sit at their kitchen table, sharing simple meals while Kevin told her about his classes, the old fluorescent light humming softly above them. "They look at me differently, Mom," he confided one evening, pushing his rice around his plate, the fork scraping quietly against the ceramic. "Like I don't belong there." Sandra reached across the table, taking his hand in hers, her skin rough from years of hard work. "Mijijo, you've earned your place there. Remember what Dr. James did for us? That's the kind of doctor you'll be someday, one who helps everyone no matter where they come from." Each Sunday evening, as he boarded the bus back to campus, Kevin carried his mother's strength with him. Just like this, 5 years flew by, and Kevin finally became a doctor. His hands trembled as he held his medical school diploma, the gold-embossed letters catching the sunlight and casting tiny reflections on his face. The graduation ceremony had ended hours ago, but he remained rooted in place, memories flooding back of that hospital bed where he'd first dreamed of becoming a doctor, weak but determined. His mother stood beside him, dabbing tears with a worn handkerchief, her face glowing with pride and years of sacrifice finally bearing fruit. With his credentials in hand, Kevin submitted his application to Memorial General Hospital, the very place where Dr. James had saved his life all those years ago. Walking through those familiar sliding doors for his interview, his heart raced with purpose, each beat a reminder of the gift he'd been given. The hospital's halls still smelled of antiseptic and hope, just as he remembered from his countless visits as a patient. In the boardroom, Kevin sat tall before the panel of senior doctors and administrators, his shoulders straight despite his nerves. "Why do you want to work specifically at Memorial General?" one of them asked, peering at him over wire-rimmed glasses. Kevin touched the scar on his chest, a gesture that had become almost unconscious over the years, like checking for a lucky charm. "This hospital gave me a second chance at life," he began, his voice steady and clear, carrying the weight of his journey. "Dr. James Parker performed my heart surgery here when my family couldn't afford it. He showed me that medicine isn't just about procedures. It's about compassion and giving back to the community. That lesson has stayed with me every single day." The board members exchanged impressed glances as Kevin continued sharing his journey from patient to medical student, each word painting a picture of determination and gratitude. His passion was evident in every word, his determination clear in his eyes that sparkled with unshed tears. When he finished speaking, there was a moment of profound silence in the room, broken only by the distant sounds of hospital life. That evening, Kevin rushed home clutching an envelope containing his offer letter, taking the stairs 2 at a time despite years of careful living. He burst through the door of their small apartment, where Sandra was preparing dinner, the familiar smell of her homemade soup filling the air. "Mom, I got it," he exclaimed, waving the letter like a victory flag. Sandra dropped her cooking spoon with a clatter and embraced him tightly, her tears of joy dampening his shirt as she whispered prayers of thanks. A week later, Kevin stood before his mirror, adjusting his crisp white coat, the hospital's emblem proudly displayed on the breast pocket, running his fingers over the embroidered letters. Sandra helped smooth down his collar, her hands gentle and proud, just as they had been when she'd helped him button his first school uniform. As he stepped outside their apartment building, neighbors who had once whispered doubts about the poor kid's dreams now nodded respectfully, their faces showing genuine admiration. After taking a cab, using a minuscule sum of money he got from his first bonus paycheck, Kevin reached the grand entrance of Memorial General Hospital, his new ID badge gleaming against his crisp white coat. The familiar antiseptic smell and bustling atmosphere brought back a flood of memories, both daunting and hopeful. He paused near the reception desk, his hand unconsciously moving to the scar on his chest, tracing the raised line through his shirt. So many years, he whispered to himself, remembering the frightened boy he'd once been, clutching his mother's hand in these same hallways. The corridors seemed smaller now, but the sounds remained the same. The soft beeping of monitors, squeaking shoes on polished floors, and the gentle murmur of voices floating from patient rooms and nurses' stations. During his lunch break, Kevin approached Sarah, a veteran nurse with silver-streaked hair who'd been working at the hospital for decades. "I was wondering," he began, fidgeting with his coffee cup, his fingers tapping a nervous rhythm against the paper surface, "if Dr. James Parker still works here?" Sarah's face softened with recognition, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Dr. Parker? He retired about 3 years ago. Lives alone in Pine Grove now, just a few miles from here. Still volunteers at the free clinic sometimes, I hear." Kevin's heart quickened, hope blooming in his chest. "Would you happen to have his address? He performed my heart surgery when I was 12. I wouldn't be standing here today if it wasn't for him. I've always wanted to thank him properly." Sarah hesitated briefly before pulling out a notepad, her maternal instincts clearly winning over hospital protocol. "Usually we don't give out personal information, but you already work here, so I think I can trust you." Kevin nodded, carefully folding the paper and tucking it into his pocket like a treasure map. The rest of his shift seemed to crawl by as he thought about the upcoming visit, his mind wandering between patients and paperwork. As the sun began to set, Kevin took another cab to the suburban streets of Pine Grove. The neighborhood was peaceful, with mature maple trees lining the sidewalks and well-maintained gardens fronting modest homes. Golden light filtered through the leaves, creating dancing shadows on the pavement. He checked the address again, his palms growing sweaty on the steering wheel as each house number brought him closer to his destination. Finally, he pulled up in front of a small white house with blue shutters and a wraparound porch. A well-worn pickup truck sat in the driveway, and the porch light cast a warm, welcoming glow in the gathering dusk. He knocked firmly on the door, the sound echoing through the quiet evening like a warning. No response. He tried again, louder this time, his knuckles stinging as he called out, "Dr. Parker, I'm Kevin. I work at the Memorial. I was your patient 15 years ago. Please, if you're there, answer." Still nothing but an eerie silence that seemed to grow heavier by the second. Moving to the nearest window, Kevin cupped his hands against the glass, peering through the gap in the dusty curtains. His heart stopped, then lurched painfully in his chest. There, sprawled on the living room floor between an overturned coffee table and a worn leather armchair, lay James Parker, motionless and ashen-faced. Without hesitation, Kevin grabbed a decorative garden stone and smashed the window, the crash shattering the evening quiet. He quickly cleared away the sharp edges before climbing through, ignoring the guard's startled shout behind him. Glass crunched under his shoes as he rushed to James's side, his medical training taking over, pushing aside the panic that threatened to overwhelm him. "Dr. Parker!" Kevin checked for a pulse, his fingers pressing against the cold skin of James's neck. Nothing. The skin was still warm, though, giving him hope. Tilting James's head back to clear the airway, Kevin began chest compressions, counting steadily under his breath, each push precise and measured. "Come on," he muttered, pressing rhythmically against James's chest, sweat beading on his forehead. "Not like this. Not today. You didn't give up on me, and I won't give up on you." After 2 rounds of CPR, James suddenly gasped, his body jerking as his heart restarted. His eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on Kevin's face, as color began returning to his cheeks. Recognition dawned in his expression, followed by tears welling up in his eyes. Kevin supported James's head, his own eyes misting over as the magnitude of the moment hit him. The man who had given him a second chance at life had just received the same gift in return. The circle was complete, a debt repaid in the most profound way possible. Kevin carefully helped James onto the worn leather couch, adjusting a faded cushion behind his back. The old piece of furniture had clearly seen better days, its surface cracked in places from years of use. James's hands trembled slightly as he settled in, his breathing still uneven from the ordeal, and Kevin noticed how fragile his former surgeon looked. "Thank you," James whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd be the one needing saving, ha." His fingers clutched at the armrest, knuckles white with tension. Kevin sat down beside him, the couch creaking softly under their weight. The familiar scent of old books and coffee filled the room. "Dr. Parker, do you remember me? I'm Kevin. You performed heart surgery on me 15 years ago when my mother Sandra couldn't afford treatment." James's eyes widened with recognition, tears forming at the corners. A spark of life returned to his tired face. "Little Kevin, the boy who promised to become a doctor?" His voice cracked as he reached out to touch Kevin's arm, as if making sure he was real. His fingers brushed against the sleeve of Kevin's white coat. "Look at you now, a surgeon, I can't believe it." "I kept my promise," Kevin said softly, warmth filling his chest at the memory. "I work at your old hospital now. 3rd floor, just down the hall from your former office." James leaned back, shaking his head in wonder. Life has a strange way of coming full circle. His gaze drifted to the empty room around them, and his expression fell. The walls were lined with medical awards gathering dust. "My children. They're both in Europe now. They have their own lives, successful careers. I call them, but..." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "They're always too busy. Always next time, next holiday, next year." Kevin noticed the collection of unopened birthday cards on the side table, their corners collecting dust. Some were dated months ago, their cheerful designs a stark contrast to their neglected state. "My wife," James continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "She passed 3 years ago. Cancer. The house. It's so quiet now. Sometimes I go days without speaking to anyone." He wiped at his eyes with shaking hands, his wedding ring catching the afternoon light. "Maybe this is what I deserve. I spent so many years focused on my work, saving others while my own family slipped away. Now, here I am, alone, useless." "Dr. Parker," Kevin interrupted gently, placing a steady hand on the older man's shoulder. He could feel the slight tremor running through James's frame. "You're not useless, and you won't be alone anymore. I'm here now, and I promise I'll stay. What you did for me, it wasn't just surgery. You gave me a future, a purpose. You showed me what real compassion looks like." Kevin squeezed James's shoulder gently, his touch steady and reassuring, the way James had once steadied him during his own darkest moments. "Dr. Parker, your life has touched so many people in ways you can't imagine. That day you found my mother outside the hospital. You could have walked past, but you didn't. You stopped. You listened. You cared. Not many doctors would have done that for a desperate single mother." James's eyes glistened as Kevin continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Because of your kindness, I'm alive today. Every time I put on this white coat, I think of you. Every time I help a patient, I remember how you helped me. Your compassion didn't just save my life. It showed me what kind of doctor, what kind of person I wanted to become. You taught me that medicine isn't just about procedures and protocols." Kevin leaned forward, his voice earnest and filled with conviction. "Think about all the lives you've touched throughout your career. All those families who got to take their loved ones home because of your skill and dedication. Those children who grew up to have families of their own because you gave them a chance. Each one of them carries a piece of your legacy." James wiped his eyes with trembling fingers, overwhelmed by the flood of memories and emotion. Kevin reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean handkerchief, offering it to the older man with the same gentleness James had shown him years ago. "You're not alone anymore, Dr. Parker. I'll visit you regularly. We can have coffee, talk about medicine, or just watch TV together. Whatever you'd like." Kevin gestured around the room, his eyes warm with determination. "We can start small. Maybe brighten up this place a bit, get you out for some fresh air. How about we have dinner together once a week? My mom's cooking has gotten even better over the years." James dabbed at his eyes with the handkerchief, his hands gradually becoming steadier. His shoulders straightened slightly, and for the first time since Kevin arrived, a genuine smile spread across his weathered face, erasing years of worry lines. He reached out and clasped Kevin's hand tightly, the warmth of human connection flooding back into his world. "Thank you," James whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just for saving my life today, but for giving me hope again. For showing me that maybe these final years don't have to be empty after all. I never expected—" His voice trailed off, heavy with unspoken gratitude. "They won't be," Kevin assured him warmly, his eyes bright with purpose. "This is just the beginning, Dr. Parker. Just the beginning. We have so many good days ahead of us." Later that week, Kevin arrived with Mrs. Martinez, a kind-faced woman in her 50s with gentle eyes and a welcoming smile. Her silver-streaked hair was neatly pulled back, and she wore a simple floral blouse. "Dr. Parker," Kevin called out, his voice full of enthusiasm, "I'd like you to meet someone who's going to help make things easier around here." James, sitting in his favorite worn leather armchair, looked up from his morning paper with curiosity. The medical journal he'd been reading slipped onto his lap as Mrs. Martinez stepped forward, extending her hand warmly. Her smile reached her eyes, creating gentle crinkles at the corners. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Parker. I'll be here a few hours each day to help with the cleaning, cooking, and whatever else you might need." Over the following weeks, James's house transformed like a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis. The dusty corners disappeared, replaced by fresh-cut flowers in crystal vases and the inviting aroma of home-cooked meals. The hardwood floors gleamed with new polish, and the windows sparkled in the sunlight. Sandra visited often, bringing her famous chicken soup and fresh-baked bread that filled the kitchen with comforting scents that reminded James of his childhood home. "You need to try this, Dr. Parker," Sandra would insist, ladling out generous portions into his favorite blue ceramic bowl. "It's Kevin's favorite from when he was little. The secret is adding fresh herbs right at the end." In the evenings, Kevin would stop by after his hospital shifts, still wearing his scrubs and carrying the weight of the day's responsibilities. They'd sit in the garden, where James had started tending to a small patch of tomatoes under Mrs. Martinez's patient guidance. The plants grew strong and healthy, much like their friendship. The two doctors would discuss challenging cases, with James offering insights from his decades of experience, his hands gesturing animatedly as he spoke. "What would you do in this situation?" Kevin would ask, describing a particularly complex case, his eyes bright with curiosity and respect. James's eyes would light up as he shared his knowledge, feeling useful and valued once again, his expertise finding new purpose in mentorship. They established a routine of chess games twice a week, their matches punctuated by conversations about medicine, life, and everything in between. Sandra would bring snacks, usually her homemade cookies or fresh fruit, and watch them play, chuckling at their competitive banter and good-natured teasing about each other's strategies. Standing on his porch one evening, James watched Kevin and Sandra wave goodbye as they headed to their car. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, while purple clouds drifted lazily overhead, and a gentle breeze rustled through the newly trimmed garden. James felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the weather. His house, once a lonely reminder of what he'd lost, had become a home again, filled with laughter, conversation, and care. The empty spaces were now filled with new memories and possibilities. He touched the chess piece in his pocket, the black king that Kevin had insisted he keep until their next game. His fingers traced its familiar curves as he smiled to himself. It was a simple object, but it represented so much more: connection, purpose, and the unexpected joy of finding family in the people whose lives he'd touched so many years ago. The piece had become a symbol of their bond, a tangible reminder that sometimes life's greatest gifts come in the form of second chances and renewed connections. If you enjoyed the story of Kevin, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.